Hey folks, this is John Miller, Executive Editor with WB News. We would like to welcome you to Ask the Experts, featuring John Halterman of Beacon Wealth Management. John is the founder, owner, and certified wealth strategist at Beacon Wealth Management. You can find out more at bwmwb.com. And now live from the studios of the Exponent Telegram in Clarksburg, West Virginia, let's Ask the Expert. Welcome to Ask the Expert. Today we're joined by John Halterman of Beacon Wealth Management. John, welcome.
Thank you, John. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I tell you what, federal workers have a lot going on. We've gotten some phone calls. I know in talking with you, you've gotten some phone calls, and they're trying to decide their best way forward. And they have a lot of parts to their retirement system, one of which is the TSP, Thrift Savings Plan. And then there's some Roth, and there's some Social Security, and there's a regular pension. Yeah, you break that down. What should federal workers be looking at right now?
Well, you know what? I mean, you're right. There is so much chaos. And because of the emotional stress of it, people are trying to figure out, what do I do? And the one thing I will tell you is, for most of these people, anybody who has a thrift savings plan, that has been their plan to save money for their own retirement. And the good thing is that because they've been contributing, okay, markets don't affect you as much when you're contributing to a plan because, in a negative market, you're not taking anything out. And so you have time for recovery. What one of the challenges right now is, on top of them being under chaos, is the markets are also under chaos. And so someone who might have had $500 or $1 million could have seen that decline 10% with just in the last week or so. And so what we really have to be thinking about is, okay, if I do leave, what am I going to do with that money? What should I be thinking about? And the first thing I tell people to think about is, do you need income from it? Because you saved that for a reason. You saved it to support your lifestyle. And so if you're saving it, you want to use it. Because, I've met with a lot of federal employees recently, and they're like, well, I don't know if I need this or not. And I said, well, let's figure it out. Because we need to figure out how much income you need. Does your pensions provide that enough? And if they don't, let's figure out how much we can take out of your TSP. And for every one of them, I always say, the ultimate goal is, when you first retire, you want to have more income. And the reason why I say you want to have more income, let's say you're a 60-year-old and you're leaving work, you're feeling good, you still physically feel good. Well, you want to do things. Now, all of a sudden, you have time on your side. Well, so you might travel more than you've ever traveled. You might go out to eat more than you've ever done because you don't have work to hold you down. And so because of that, I always tell people, you might need about 120% of what you currently make net income. But we got to figure that out.
Yeah, in our past discussions, I think you call them the go-go 60s.
Yeah.
So you've got that factoring in, and you've got the fact that obviously, if you're a federal worker and you take the buyout or you go into early retirement, you can obviously continue to work. And if they do so, probably not a great idea to draw down on the TSP or that factor right away.
Well, you're right. It depends on what they're doing. If you're going to take your pension, okay, if that's and then you go to work, well, you might already have more money than what you already had before. But if you're quitting and now you need income, what you got to be thinking is, number one, do I leave my TSP there? Well, I got to tell you, your TSP only has a limited amount of options. It doesn't necessarily have that great of investment options, but it's where you got your matching funds. The whole purpose of doing TSP was never because the investments were great. It was always because that's where matching money. So you got to decide, do I leave it there or do I roll it over into an IRA? Now, the beauty of it is, if you roll it over or consider rolling over to an IRA, well, the beauty is now you have unlimited investment options. And I always tell people, I just use the fixed account as an option. In the fixed account, they're only paying 4% right now, or a little over 4%. Whereas in the real world, you can actually get the same equivalent, but 25% higher. And so what I tell people is that if you're looking for safety in just part of your investments, why are you accepting something that's not even giving you what I call real world markets? And so that's what you got to be first thinking is, do I need the income? And then if I do need the income, should I keep it in the plan or should I roll it over? And then the next thing is that, okay, what's my investment choices? How do I structure? Because, people think all the time, hey, I'll just roll this over. I have this money in one big pot and I'm going to take 4 or 5% out. Well, I got to tell you, that's okay. but really there's better methods that you can do it, because ultimately for anybody, you got to be able to say, how do I get the income I need to be able to enjoy my life? How do I make my money grow? Because I might live 20 or 30 years. And then eventually, how do I pass this money on in the most tax advantageous way to my kids or to my heirs? And so those are all things that you have to deal with when it comes to the TSP.
So again, people are emotional, everybody's looking towards retirement at some point. But, for some of the people, it's hitting them 5 years earlier, or 10 years earlier even. And there's a lot of factors. Do they qualify yet for Social Security? Do they plan on working? Things like that. As you meet with someone,
Mhm.
what's going to happen if I come in tomorrow and I'm a federal worker? What are we going to talk about? What are you going to need to help me
Sure.
get
Well, the very first thing is I got to get an understanding, because you said it right. There's a lot of variables, moving parts that's going to happen, because you might have a spouse. And as an example, if you have a spouse and your spouse is going to continue working somewhere else, well, that could change how often you go do things. So we're going to need to know, what are your intentions? What are your lifestyle intentions after if you left? And so whether that's fully retired, both of you retired, travel plans, whatever it may be, we got to understand every source of income you potentially may get, every source of investments, every source of anything that's related to your finances. So we're going to ask for that type of information. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a total assessment. That assessment is going to be based on what you have relative to what you want to accomplish. Are there any missed opportunities, or are there any roadblocks that are stopping you from potentially getting there? A simple example, is I'll see people that have all their money in just the the C fund, okay, which is good. If you're in the accumulation stage, that's the S&P 500. And so when you're accumulating money, that volatility may not have a bother on you. But now that you're taking money out, well, the C share, I'm not saying you shouldn't have some of your money there, but to have 100%, that's taking a risk that may not be necessary. And so what we got to be able to do is say, okay, how do we divide your money now? How do we bucket it out to where we build that strategy that's appropriate to achieve the things you want now? Because what I always tell people is, it's like climbing a mountain. When you're climbing a mountain, the risks are totally different than when you're coming off that mountain. And you're now coming off the mountain. And so what we got to be thinking about is what's appropriate for what you're doing now versus what was appropriate for what you were doing the last 20 years. Completely changed.
I think sometimes, John, people look at it um, and they're worried about, how do I get what I want? And I think seeing a pathway forward, how do you help them see that pathway
We're
forward?
going to put together a clear strategy. We call it a wealth strategy. We're going to go through that complete assessment. And then once we get done, we're going to give you recommendations on every single aspect of it. We're going to give you recommendations on the exact investments that you should be, the exact amount of income you could take out. How do you take out your taxes? How do you divide the money between different things? How do you deal with, if something were to happen to you? How's your surviving spouse going to handle it? How's your children going to handle it? We're going to make sure that you have the appropriate wills and legal documents. We're going to make sure that if you end up in a nursing home, that all of that stuff is accounted for. Because what we realize is you've been accumulating money for the last 30 or 40 years. And now all of a sudden you want to stop, but you don't want to worry about this. You want to go out and enjoy life. You want to go travel. You want to see things that you've never been able to do. And so that's what we want too. We want you to do that while we worry about the money and make sure that regardless of what it is, that we have some type of game plan in place that you could feel confident that your family has a provision set up. That way, when something does happen, whether it's you're living and traveling, whether you end up in a nursing home, or whether you pass away and you have the family's having to deal with taxes, you can feel great that those things are taken care of.
It is called Beacon Wealth Management for a reason. You're talking total wealth management
That's right.
strategy here.
Yeah, investments alone, that's a component. That's like going to the doctor and only worrying about your right leg. I mean, you got a whole body, and so you can't just compartmentalize it down to just a section of your body. It is total wealth care, and that's what we look at is, like you said, comprehensive wealth planning. Because the one thing we know is if we can have the greatest investment plan in the world, but if you end up in a nursing home and you lose all your assets because you didn't have a provision set up, well, then guess what? That investment became irrelevant. So we got to make sure that we plan for all situations.
John, you're out in the community, involved with a lot of different activities and groups, and I know you talk to a lot of people, and I know you've been talking to a lot of federal workers. What do you say to them as we wrap up here? What do you say to them to calm them down and get them there?
Call us. I mean, the very first thing I ask, because you know what, I've had people call me in total chaos, emotional chaos. They get these emails from Elon Musk, and they're demanding things that they're not used to getting. They don't know, they don't have the certainty, and that uncertainty doesn't have to happen. All it has to happen is when you feel that way, if you want to calm your nerves, you want to feel better, call us because we will help you figure this out. And I got to tell you, for every single person that we've put together a strategy and done these things for, it changed the way they felt. Every one of them has said to me, I'm so glad that we took this step because it was breaking us, from an emotional standpoint. And by taking that step, it allowed them to have now going from chaotic uncertainty to knowing they have a strategy in place. And that's the big thing. When you have that, you have confidence. And that's what I want to see for people is I want them to have that confidence again.
Again, we're here with Ask the Expert, John Halterman of Beacon Wealth Management. Anything else to close, John?
Nope. I think if you do that, and I will say, don't wait. I get it. If there's one good thing that came out of this whole thing is that it has created a level of urgency for federal employees who may have just been potentially lackadaisical, thinking, oh, you know what, I'll do this one day, to now everybody is saying, okay, how does this apply to me? And so what I tell people is whether you've talked to somebody or not, let's talk because I do believe that the time is right now.
Again, John Halterman, Beacon Wealth Management. Give him a call today. Thank you.